In the quiet, unassuming landscape of Bath Township, Michigan, a seemingly ordinary family saga was about to descend into a chilling tableau of disappearance, deceit, and a decades-long pursuit of justice. It began not with a sudden violent discovery, but with an absence, the profound, unsettling void left by a missing woman. Marilyn DePue. Her disappearance on April 15, 1990, would spark a mystery that would stretch across state lines, baffle investigators, and slowly, painstakingly peel back layers of a meticulously constructed facade, revealing a darkness far more sinister than anyone initially imagined. This is the story of a vanishing act, the agonizing search for truth, and the agonizingly slow emergence of a killer from the deepest shadows of suspicion. Marilyn DePue was a 38-year-old mother of three, a seemingly ordinary woman navigating the complexities of a difficult marriage. Her husband, Dennis DePue, a 43-year-old man who worked as a loan officer, presented a veneer of normalcy, yet beneath it simmered a volatile temper and a controlling nature that had brought their marriage to the brink of collapse. Their relationship had been fraught with tension for years, marked by escalating arguments and Marilyn's growing fear for her safety and that of her children. Divorce proceedings were underway, and a bitter custody battle loomed over their three young children. Marilyn had recently gained temporary custody of the children, a decision that, in hindsight, marked a dangerous turning point. This impending legal finality, this moment of definitive separation, appeared to be the spark that ignited an unimaginable chain of events. On April 15, 1990, the day Marilyn DePue vanished, the final custody hearing was scheduled to take place. It was a Sunday, and Marilyn was expected to pick up her children from Dennis's home. She never arrived. Her absence was immediately alarming. Marilyn was a devoted mother, utterly reliable, and missing a custody hearing, especially one so critical, was entirely out of character. Her family, concerned by her sudden silence, grew increasingly anxious as the hours passed without contact. The initial calls to her home, her friends, her workplace yielded no answers. A knot of dread began to tighten in the pit of their stomachs. Had she simply chosen to leave? Or was something far more sinister at play? The initial uncertainty was the first layer of the deep mystery that would shroud Marilyn's fate for years to come. When law enforcement was finally contacted, the case was treated as a missing person investigation. There was no body, no immediate crime scene, no definitive evidence of foul play beyond Marilyn's uncharacteristic disappearance. Dennis DePue, as her estranged husband and the last person to have had contact with her, or at least the last person with whom she was scheduled to have contact, immediately became a person of interest. He told investigators that Marilyn indeed came to his home that Sunday to pick up the children, but claimed she then left in her vehicle, a light blue Chevrolet Citation, to run some errands and never returned. He maintained this story consistently, presenting himself as a concerned, if somewhat stoic, husband. His demeanor, though calm, struck some investigators as unusually dispassionate given the gravity of the situation. However, almost immediately, cracks began to appear in Dennis DePue's narrative. Witnesses emerged who contradicted his account. Neighbors reported seeing his car, a Ford Bronco, leaving his property at unusual hours around the time of Marilyn's disappearance, and later returning with a trailer attached. A former co-worker of Dennis's also came forward, stating that Dennis had recently inquired about ways to dispose of a body,
a chilling detail that, at the time, seemed almost too macabre to be true. These early pieces of contradictory information began to chip away at the initial simplicity of the missing person case, suggesting something far more complex and premeditated. The seeds of suspicion began to sprout around Dennis DePue. But without a body, without a definitive crime scene, it remained just that, suspicion. The search for Marilyn and her car intensified. Police issued alerts, canvassed neighborhoods, and interviewed anyone who knew the couple. The Chevrolet Citation was eventually found abandoned in a park-and-ride lot off a highway in Ann Arbor, Michigan, several days after Marilyn's disappearance. The discovery of the car was a significant lead, yet it offered few immediate answers. There were no signs of a struggle inside the vehicle, no clear forensic evidence pointing directly to foul play, let alone a killer. It seemed to have been deliberately left there, perhaps as a red herring, or as a final act in a carefully planned vanishing. The car's location, miles from Bath Township, only deepened the mystery, suggesting a deliberate attempt to mislead investigators and obscure the true events of April 15th. As the investigation into Marilyn's disappearance continued, the focus sharpened on Dennis DePue. His behavior became increasingly erratic and defensive. When confronted with the inconsistencies in his story and the emerging witness testimonies, his composure began to fray. Instead of cooperating fully, he became evasive, often refusing to answer questions or providing vague responses. Investigators noted his almost clinical detachment when discussing his wife's disappearance, a stark contrast to the typical display of distress by family members in such situations. The suspicion, once a quiet murmur, began to escalate into a strong current. Yet, the absence of Marilyn's body remained the insurmountable hurdle for law enforcement. Without it, building a direct murder case against Dennis was virtually impossible. The investigators, however, were tenacious. They began to dig deeper into Dennis DePue's background and his tumultuous relationship with Marilyn. They learned of his controlling tendencies, his jealousy, and Marilyn's repeated attempts to leave him. Friends and family described Marilyn's fear of Dennis, her explicit statements that if anything ever happened to her, Dennis would be responsible. These statements, though not direct evidence of a crime, painted a chilling picture of escalating domestic tension and a potential motive rooted in the impending divorce and custody loss. They learned that Dennis owned multiple firearms and had a remote property in their area. All these pieces of information started to form a mosaic of motive and opportunity. But the central piece, Marilyn's fate, was still missing. As the pressure mounted, Dennis DePue did the unexpected. In August 1990, just 4 months after Marilyn's disappearance, he fled. He became a fugitive. His sudden disappearance confirmed for many his implicit guilt. It was an admission by flight, an acknowledgement that the web of suspicion was tightening around him. His flight initiated a nationwide manhunt, turning what was once a local missing person case into a federal pursuit. The U.S. Marshal Service became involved, and Dennis DePue's name and image were circulated across the country, first through law enforcement channels and later famously through the popular television show America's Most Wanted. This nationwide attention broadened the scope of the search, but also underscored the deep frustration felt by investigators who had, for months, been unable to find direct evidence of a crime or a body.
For years, the case went cold, at least in terms of direct new evidence of Marilyn's whereabouts. Dennis DePue vanished into the vastness of America, adopting aliases, moving from state to state, always just one step ahead of the law. The children, now without their mother and with their father a wanted fugitive, faced unimaginable trauma and uncertainty. Marilyn's family was left in agonizing limbo, unable to grieve properly, clinging to the slim hope that she might still be alive, but increasingly resigned to the bleak reality of her likely murder. The mystery of what truly happened on April 15, 1990, deepened with each passing year, shrouded in the silence of a missing body and a vanished killer. The initial doubts about Dennis DePue's involvement had hardened into conviction for many, but conviction without proof was not justice. Years bled into decades. The initial investigators retired, new ones took up the mantle, but the case of Marilyn DePue remained a haunting, unresolved file. The children grew up, carrying the weight of their family's tragedy. And then, a breakthrough, not from new witness testimony or a sudden confession, but from nature itself. In 2004, 14 years after Marilyn's disappearance, a hunter stumbled upon human remains in a remote, wooded area of a state game reserve in Genesee County, Michigan. The remains were skeletal, barely identifiable, but the location was significant, not far from a property once owned by Dennis DePue's family. Forensic anthropologists and DNA specialists worked meticulously to identify the remains. The painstaking process eventually yielded a definitive match. The bones belonged to Marilyn DePue. The discovery of Marilyn's body was a pivotal moment. It transformed the missing person case into a homicide investigation. It confirmed the worst fears of her family and closed the chapter on any lingering hope of her survival. More importantly, it provided the definitive proof that Dennis DePue's story of her simply leaving was a fabrication. While the cause of death could not be precisely determined due to the skeletal nature of the remains, the context of her disappearance, coupled with the location of her body and the history of Dennis DePue's flight, pointed unequivocally to murder. The mystery surrounding Marilyn's ultimate fate was finally solved. She had been killed. But the man responsible, Dennis DePue, was still a phantom, a ghost in the wind for 14 years. The renewed focus on the case, fueled by the discovery of Marilyn's remains, reinvigorated the nationwide manhunt for Dennis DePue. With the confirmation of murder, the urgency escalated. America's Most Wanted re-aired segments on his case, appealing to the public for any information. The U.S. Marshals redoubled their efforts, utilizing advanced tracking techniques and a vast network of informants. His profile as a charming but volatile individual, adept at blending in, made him a particularly challenging fugitive to locate. He was known to have worked odd jobs, often in manual labor, and to have avoided using his real name or any form of traceable identification. Finally, in April 2005, a tip, likely sparked by renewed media attention, led authorities to Colorado Springs, Colorado. Dennis DePue, living under the assumed name of Hank the Carpenter, had been quietly living there for years.
He was operating a small carpentry business, maintaining his facade of normalcy, perhaps even believing he had finally escaped the long arm of justice. U.S. Marshals, acting on the tip, converged on his residence. When confronted, the man who had eluded capture for a decade and a half knew his time was up. Dennis DePue did not surrender. As law enforcement closed in, he retreated into his home. The standoff was brief but intense. Before officers could breach the premises, Dennis DePue took his own life. With a single gunshot, the long, agonizing saga of Marilyn DePue's murder finally came to its dark, conclusive end. The killer had been brought to light, not by direct capture and trial, but by a forced hand, a final act of self-preservation from facing the justice he had so long evaded. The death of Dennis DePue, though it meant he would never stand trial, provided a grim form of closure for Marilyn's family. The absence of a trial meant they would never hear full confession, nor would they see him held accountable in a courtroom. However, the discovery of Marilyn's body and the subsequent identification and cornering of Dennis DePue confirmed what they had known in their hearts for 15 agonizing years. Marilyn was murdered, and her husband was the perpetrator. The official cause of death for Dennis DePue was ruled a suicide, bringing a definitive end to the manhunt. The case of Marilyn DePue is a profound and chilling example of the slow, grinding machinery of justice. It illustrates how perpetrators can meticulously plan and execute crimes, how the absence of a body can cripple an investigation, and how the passage of time can conceal, yet ultimately reveal, the truth. It underscores the tireless dedication of law enforcement, particularly the U.S. Marshal Service, in pursuing fugitives for decades, refusing to let cases fade into obscurity. Most importantly, it serves as a somber testament to the victim, Marilyn DePue, whose life was tragically cut short and whose enduring presence, even in death, eventually brought her killer into the undeniable light of truth. Her story stands as a testament to the fact that while justice may be delayed, the shadows of the past can never truly erase the crimes committed, and the truth, no matter how slowly, will inevitably emerge from the darkness.